Good afternoon, good evening, and good night. This is the Screen Watching Podcast. It is Australia's #1 destination to hear two guys reviewing TV shows and movies. Like, really, where else are you going to find such content? This week on the podcast, we have, look, it's not a big show. It's certainly what is, and I've got my Webster's Dictionary around here somewhere. I did look it up earlier, but the actual definition for what we're recording here is a show. Now, on the program this week, we will talk about The Gorge, which is a TV movie that Apple dropped last week. The thing with the movie is I didn't know that this thing was coming, and I don't know if it was a surprise release or what the deal was. Maybe Simon's got some insights. We'll find out. Bobby De Niro, I call him that because we're, just like that. He's got his first ever TV program, like a TV series that he's the front face of. It's called 0 Day. It is stacked with a monster cast, and yet not a lot of people are talking about it this week. We'll find out why, but I suspect that we all know. What else have been watching? Good question. There's Pamela Anderson in The Last Showgirl, a movie that's taken a few months to get to Australia, and I don't understand why. Again, Simon may have some insight there. The SNL at 50 special. It is 3 hours of Saturday Night Live, and we've got some thoughts. I did a bit of a deep dive back into some movies of yesteryear. The Fabulous Baker Boys. Does anyone remember that title? Who knows? Pacific Heights, even less well remembered than The Fabulous Baker Boys. Folks, that is actually the definition of a show. We'll be back with it after the opening titles.
This is not like TV, only better.
Television! Teacher! Mother!
Secret lover.
What, that's it? That's your movie?
Well, I said that I had an idea for a movie.
Alright, Simon Foster, tell me, you're back from Melbourne. Literally, you tell me you were straight off the plane onto the podcast. You've got bags sitting by your feet. What's going on?
I've got airport security staring at me, wondering what the hell's going on. Hello, everyone. Hello, screen watchers. No, I'm back in the house. Yes, we had a fun weekend in Melbourne. The missus and I was down there for my Melbourne Science Fiction Film Festival.
Oh, so it does sound like a dirty weekend.
It was a dirty weekend all around. I was hit by a 24-hour bout of shocking gastro. Thanks for tuning in. I'm glad everyone's happy to hear that.
That is a dirty weekend.
It was a very dirty weekend for 24 hours, but I'm now back here in Sydney in the humidity, happy to be talking film and television. So, I think it's a pretty good week.
Internally, Simon, though, I assume that you're feeling cleansed.
Well, I went...
Because of the culture.
Because of the culture, yes. Oh, there was culture, baby. I was 36 hours without food after the bout, shall we say, expired. So, yes, I feel well cleansed. You do feel good after not eating for a whole day. I did have a friend of mine who was a doctor who said you could... It's not a bad thing every once in a while to go a full day without eating and just to burn the reserves. So I kind of do feel pretty alive for this time of night.
Yeah, look, I was told by doctors midway through the year that I wasn't supposed to eat like solid food for a couple of days there. After a strict diet of nothing but jelly for, I think it was literally 3 days straight, I've really appreciated every meal I've had since then.
Oh, for sure, yeah. And I've been very cautious. We just had a sausage roll on the plane. A Qantas sausage roll, my friend. And if anything's going to bring on about a diarrhea. Anyway, let's move on.
I was going to say exactly how did this little food-related mishap begin? Look, let's not dive too far into Simon's culinary habits. Instead, we're going to kick off with... Simon, let's lead things off with the first movie of the week. It is The Gorge on Apple TV. Let's watch a clip.
I have new orders that require me to go dark for at least a year, maybe more. A special assignment in an undisclosed location.
As an elite sniper, are you presently under any private or military contract?
No, there's not a lot of reasons for me right now.
What if I gave you a reason?
All right, so when I saw the title for this movie, I thought they were talking about the two stars, Miles Teller and Anya Taylor-Joy, because they are gorge. You got to see these two in action. There is a palpable chemistry between these two. The rest of the movie, it's kind of goofy, but let me just explain to you the plot very carefully. Well, not very. It doesn't take very careful explaining.
Can I just say, before you get into the plot, this could not sound more like YA fiction from like circa 2014.
Yeah, it isn't. No, it's more a high concept sort of sci-fi Cold War military thriller with a little bit of fantasy element thrown in. I guess it is a little
Simon,
bit YA.
again, YA 2008 through 2014.
Yeah, well, look, it tells the story of two, and let me read the logline here, two highly trained operatives who become very close and tender after being sent to protect opposite sides of a mysterious gorge. Now, when an evil that lives within the gorge emerges, they have to work together to survive what lies within. So, let me just put a little bit of context in that. On one side of this mysterious, foggy gorge, which exists in a country that neither of these operatives know where they are. They've been taken there in planes and helicopters, blindfolded, and dropped into the gorge, or dropped in tower where they spend a whole year without knowing what country they're in. They do a little bit of smart thinking. Maybe it's kind of northern Norway or the upper Russia, something like that. But one is the super hot Miles Teller, and he's the American operative. And then on the other side, you've got the super hot Anya Taylor-Joy. Now, of course, there are sparks. They first start doing a meet cute with signs across the gorge. They're not meant to communicate with each other, being from different sides of the geopolitical spectrum, but they do because they're two hot young people. They fall in love. He swings across the gorge to get to her. I started to think to myself, I'm either going to go with this or I'm really going to rip into it for being one of the silliest things I've ever seen. At that point, I decided to go with it. We then learn after an accident in which Miles Teller falls into the gorge and Anya Taylor-Joy jumps in after him, that the gorge is peopled with these strange DNA-constructed creatures, men made of trees and bugs made of rocks and all this weird and wacky stuff which the CGI guys must have just had an absolute hoot of a time putting together. I don't want to give too much away, but it's a sci-fi thriller that involves super soldiers and what may or may not have been back at the height of the Cold War of these two, secretive powers working together to create this terrible army and blah, 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 blah. It's all nonsense, and I've probably just spoiled the ending if anyone makes it that far. The thing that I was most worried about was that, like a lot of the action movies and big budget movies that the streamers throw money at by getting a whole lot of stars in and creating a sort of what would have been a big event cinema picture back in the day, they're usually shit. And you can point to all the stuff that Chris Hemsworth has done for Netflix, the terrible thing that Cameron Diaz and Jamie Foxx back in action did, that's come out on Netflix a couple of weeks ago. I watched it and didn't even bother reviewing it just because it's awful. The field is littered with these sort of movies. And I looked at this one and I thought, it's going to be another one of these where Apple kind of just hurls money at a premise hoping that it'll all stick together and they'll get a whole lot of big viewing numbers for the first couple of weeks, no matter how bad it is. It's actually a pretty cool film, and the premise, as daft as it is, I remember thinking to myself, this is an enjoyably stupid movie, and it was. It's got some great-looking action sequences. It's got these two stars taking themselves very seriously in a very silly situation, and it's actually quite exciting as it plays out. It's daft, but it's kind of cool.
Okay, and that is The Gorge and streaming now on Apple TV, correct?
Oh, yes, it is. Yes, of course it is. Yeah.
Confirm. Okay, look, let's dive right into the next thing. It is on Netflix. It is Bobby De Niro starring in 0 Day. Here's the clip.
3,402 people died on 0 Day.
Absolute nationwide terror.
Computer systems completely hijacked.
A significant number of casualties.
Every phone in America displayed the same haunting message. This will happen again.
So look, everything about 0 Day is interesting. First of all, let's talk about the plot, which has basically global cyber attacks taken place. The government's like, what's taken place? There's only one way we can really get to the heart of this. We need to set up a commission, and the only person that can set up a commission is the one president we had that kind of spoke to both sides of the aisle a couple of years ago, and that is one George Mullen, the president who has the face of Robert De Niro. So Robert De Niro is called back into action. He's been living a life out in, the country somewhere. He's getting his meals cooked for him. He's, just doing what an ex-president does, and then is suddenly brought back in to take care of this. He's got a daughter played by Lizzy Caplan. She's a congresswoman these days, and she has politely some skepticism that her father should be involved and getting back into the public eye the way that he is.
Are we talking about Party Down Lizzy Caplan?
Lizzy Caplan.
I love the Lizzy. I didn't know she was in this. I love the Lizzy Caplan.
Hold tight. Wait till you hear some of these other names, Simon. Jesse Plemons is in this. He
That's a
plays
plus.
the body man of one Robert De Niro. Okay, and you get the feeling that he may not necessarily be putting everything out as honestly as one may sort of possibly think.
Got a good face for that, Plemons.
Yeah, well, here's the thing. If you look at his face, though, Simon, what would you say is one of the defining features of Jesse Plemons, Hollywood superstar?
Well, he's always been a little plumpish.
Yeah, that's exactly it.
bit
Chunky boy.
Chunky
boy.
Yeah.
Here's the thing. Not in this movie. He is tight. He has shrunk down, and I had trouble looking at his face in a way that, you know, when you get to know somebody who's like just a bit of a chunky person and they've just lost a lot of weight, and it just doesn't quite look right because it's not how you picture the person. It's just not. Your brain isn't really quite connecting with what your eyes are seeing.
Are you sure it wasn't Matt Damon? Because I've often said that Jesse Plemons is just a fat Matt Damon. And
no,
I guess, is a thin Jesse Plemons just Matt Damon?
I can confirm it is not Matt Damon, and his head does look a bit different than Matt Damon when it's a bit thinner. Okay, but anyway, I'm not body shaming at all. It's just that this is a me thing. I have to work through this at my own end. Playing Robert De Niro, aka George Mullen's wife, is one Joan Allen. When was the last time you saw her on screen?
Love the Joan Allen. Pleasantville, one of my favourite movies. But you're right, she hasn't been around in stuff, at least stuff that I've seen for a while.
Absolutely. Joan Allen, Sheila Mullen is concerned that her husband's getting involved in this, or is he her husband? We'll get to that in a moment. Okay. So she's like, hey, we need to call in like the former chief of staff that worked for George Mullen back in the day. Okay. And whose face does that have? That has Connie Britton. You know, Connie Britton from
Love the Connie.
Nashville, from Friday Night Lights,
yeah.
Spin City back in the day, and like a whole slew of other things. Really cool. Director of the CIA, one Bill Camp. Dan Stevens, he plays a like Newsmax kind of a TV presenter, but for the left wing for some reason. Doesn't matter, don't put too much thought into that. Angela Bassett, she's in that. She plays the current president.
Oh,
Matthew
Lord.
Modine's in it. He's the Speaker of the House. Okay, like, these are a lot of names. And I've even got a supporting cast, which includes names like Clark Gregg, Gabby Hoffman. Like, this is a serious cast that I'm sure cost Netflix a boatload of money. Okay, and also the premise is kind of interesting, but here's the little twist on the premise. Yes, this guy, George Mullen's been brought back to run this commission. Okay, for some reason, like, you know, within hours of this cyber attack taking place, which just struck me as a bit weird. Usually this sort of thing happens a few months later. But he's there, he's running this whole thing, except he's, I think, what's probably referred to in the biz as an unreliable narrator, because he's definitely got some sort of degenerated sort of mental state at this point where things start disappearing on shelves. He's got lots of books so he can kind of keep memories as to what's going on. And the guy that we see as his chef, by the end of the first episode or beginning of the second episode, we realize that guy hasn't actually been a chef for about 2 years. And so things are not necessarily what you want from the guy who's running this big commission.
So I'm thinking with all this incredible cast and this amazing storyline, and I'm sure stunning production values, this is probably the best thing on television all year.
This is absolutely should be. This is the biggest disappointment on television all year, because the series has this fundamental problem. It's actually kind of got two problems. So the problems with it are, one, the techno thriller part of it doesn't really seem to make a lick of sense. Okay, like, it's not weighty enough in the world. Okay, like, it's 2025 as we're watching this. Okay, everything is run by the internet. Okay, if a global cyber attack's taken place, it should just be a bit more impactful than what we've really seen on the program.
Sure.
Okay, and like, they can talk about it being impactful, but unless you actually see the impact of it on the show, it's kind of just a bit meaningless and it's a bit too much of an ethereal idea. And the reason why it just kind of feels a little bit sort of distant as well is it kind of feels like this is just written by older people who aren't really online engaged at all, to the point where maybe they check their email like, you know, once or twice a day, but aren't necessarily online people. It just kind of feels as though it's not necessarily people who've got more of an idea than, you know, that interesting story they saw on 60 Minutes a few weeks ago and it builds a series out of that. Like, it just doesn't quite feel legitimate enough. So it really upsets the legitimacy of the storytelling. The other part of it is that the entire, like, the storytelling, techno part of it's a big part of this, but then also just all the other character work. It kind of feels like I've never been on like ADHD drugs before, but my understanding of them, having read the literature and also seen TV shows where people talk about going off them, okay, is that sometimes when you're on these drugs, it kind of makes your brain just a little bit foggy. And if you're watching this, it's kind of the experience of watching it being on ADHD drugs and just feeling a little bit foggy while watching it. You're not really quite connected to enough of it. Like, everything feels at a distance, and it's a real shame because one, cool idea for a TV program, two, amazing cast, and as you mentioned, I didn't say it, but incredible production values. It's just, it doesn't really work as a series. So eight episodes. Sorry, Simon. 8 episodes. I'm going to sit down and watch all 8 episodes. I was going to do 4 one night, 4 the next, and I watched the second episode 2, maybe 3 times, just trying to find some enthusiasm to keep on paying attention because my attention was drifting something serious in that second episode.
I will push back a little bit at your comment at the top of the podcast where you said, why isn't anyone talking about this? There's actually quite a bit of buzz in the world that I live in for this, maybe because it's De Niro, maybe because it's a cast that kind of skews a little bit older, that maybe Netflix are seriously having a grab at an older demographic with this type of show, and that's why it's not as tech-heavy as you might expect.
I mean, it's absolutely playing to an older demo, but like that's kind of still no excuse for it feeling as distant and not quite as I'm just going to use the phrase connective as it probably should be. Okay, but I'm looking sort of culturally at the moment. I feel that a program that has this cast behind it really should have a lot more attention, a lot more conversation happening in the world. Instead, I'm just hearing a lot more conversation about Weekend 2 for Captain America. I'm hearing a bit more about...
Movies are back, baby.
Box office suggests that's maybe not necessarily the case with Captain America, Simon, but...
Movies are back.
Yeah, sure. Yeah, look, it isn't the cultural event that I think it probably deserves to be. Well, sorry, it's not the cultural event that a show of this cast deserves to be, but when you see the program and some of the muted reviews I've seen around the place, I've come across one positive review, and it was my beloved Lucy from The Guardian in the UK.
You love your Lucy.
She's the only one who's really rapturous about this. Everyone else has been going, this just should be better. Okay, and so I think this kind of is the general mood around the program.
I'm going to check it out because of that cast and those production values. But
yeah,
you're usually all over the showrunner of something like this. Is there any name behind it that should know better?
Look, most interesting name on it is Noah Oppenheim, who's the former head of NBC News, who is also doing some screenwriting on the side.
Wow, okay. Well, that's not very interesting.
Outside of that, you've also got the guy who ran Narcos back in the day as his co-showrunner. And that guy, I always thought Narcos was kind of okay. It was fairly engaging, but maybe just not quite as good as it probably should have been.
All right, well, that brings us to the 2 big lead reviews and brings us to the question we love asking each other. Dan Barrett, what else have you been watching?
I don't really love asking that question. It's fine. I know you're excited by it.
I do get excited by it. I like to know what you do with your week.
It's fine. Okay, look, I did a couple of things. First of all, because I freed up a fair bit of time with not watching all of Zero Day.
Really?
I was like, well, what do I really want to watch? And we do this other podcast where we look at the films of 1987. And so it's kind of got me just feeling a bit more nostalgic. So I just kind of caught up on a couple of movies I'd always meant to see at some point in my life. Okay, but just hadn't really quite gotten around to it. And the sort of movies I wanted to watch were things that kind of felt like, when I was a kid, these are big grown-up adult movies. And they absolutely were. I watched The Fabulous Baker Boys, which
Wonderful.
You may remember as being the piano drama with 2 of the Bridges boys. And
one of the films of my formative years. I love that film. Seen it many times.
Yeah, Michelle Pfeiffer's the female lead in that one. I've always heard about this film just being like this sort of great gem that is kind of, it sort of bubbles away in the background that no one really talks about so much anymore. But it was kind of like that sort of thing of this should have won the Academy Award but didn't. For
her, absolutely.
Well, I think the film generally, so it was an Academy Award nominated film. Okay,
Steve Kloves wrote and directed, yeah.
Yeah, I didn't love it. I wanted to love it. I think I just went into it with just too high an expectation. And I think I went to the movie. I didn't allow the movie to come to me. And I think maybe that was part of the issue there. The other thing I watched is because I was after a, slightly elevated but also a bit trashy, thriller from the early 90s. I sat down and watched Pacific Heights. That's the one with Michael Keaton terrorizing the aforementioned Matthew Modine and Melanie Griffith?
Dakota's
mum.
mum.
Was I watching on screen? Yeah. Yeah, I'm sure it was Melanie Griffith I was watching.
It definitely was Melanie Griffith, yeah.
Anyway, that film was actually pretty fun. If you haven't seen Pacific Heights, give that one a look. I think it's kind of forgotten in the pantheon of 90s thrillers, but it was kind of a good one. It's got this good supporting cast to it. I don't want to spoil some of the faces that crop up in it, but there's some good supports.
Well, I'm glad you asked. You going to ask?
Yeah, sure. Okay, what else have you been watching?
Well, I got out and saw a brand new movie this week. It's called The Last Showgirl. It stars one Pamela Anderson, who's been getting the kind of reviews that you didn't expect Pamela Anderson to ever get for her performance in this story of a small troupe of Las Vegas showgirls, dancers, who have the last sort of full-on feather boa showgirl extravaganza to be playing on the Vegas Strip, and they get news from their manager, wonderfully played in a very convincing acting role by one Dave Bautista, doing work much like Pamela Anderson you would not expect from someone like Dave Bautista. He's terrific in this. That they only have a couple of weeks to perform, and they've got a series of farewell shows to put together, and each one sort of representing a little bit of a death by 1,000 cuts to these girls who love working the showgirl routines and putting on the feathers. The one who loves it most of all, of course, is Pamela Anderson, who's been there since the late 80s when the showgirl format was why people came to Vegas. Now, not so much in the,
we all saw the movie from the mid-90s.
We all love the movie Showgirls, yes, when they were at the height of their cultural significance. This group of showgirls is a really interesting bunch. Most notably in there is Kiernan Shipka, who we all remember as Sabrina and from Mad Men, of course.
I literally just watched her in Twisters about 15 minutes before we started recording this podcast.
Yep, and she is fantastic. She is clearly a young actress who is, well, maybe not so young anymore. She goes to places in this that you may not expect the young girl from Mad Men to go, but she's terrific, as is Brenda Song, as is Jamie Lee Curtis, who is on the borderline of kind of acting up a storm a little bit. She's very orangey with her fake makeup, and she's an ex-showgirl turned cocktail waitress who's trying to survive in LA. This one, it's directed by Gia Coppola, one of the Coppola clan. Very much a 70s feel to it, this one. There's I've got to be straightforward. There's not a lot of plot to it other than sort of the ticking clock that is winding down to the girls' last show. But it is about the character and about how they all interact and how this represents a really sad moment for them and maybe for Las Vegas as well. So The Last Showgirl for Mad Men Films is in limited release around the country.
Sorry, quick question. So
Sure.
Last Showgirl, look, two things. One, I was kind of interested in the movie because it sounds like it's a interesting enough movie.
Oh, yeah, and it was a festival. It was an Oscar, an award season talked about one anyway. It never quite got the traction to be nominated, but there was a lot of talk about her for an award.
Yeah. Okay, so I was really interested in seeing it. So I guess my first sort of question statement, this is actually probably the only question I have, which is, why has it taken so long to come out in Australia? Because it kind of feels like this was a discussed movie like maybe 4 or 5 months ago.
It was being timed to run with the Oscar nominees. Mad Men wanted to hang on to it to see if they could leverage any award season success it had, and it didn't have any, so it's kind of running into theatres now up against a whole lot of Oscar contenders, so it probably won't do the business it deserves to do until it hits the small screen. But yeah, these don't need to be rushed into cinemas like the big blockbusters do. This we've had this discussion before.
Yeah, I know, but I mean, I feel like I'm a man of the world, and so by the time that all the buzz, like the initial buzz around a movie's kind of subsided, the likelihood of me still being excited about it is pretty slim. I'm just going to catch it up on streaming.
But the general audience,
see this in a cinema.
But none of the general audience are listening to the buzz on something like this. They don't know what Last Showgirl is until it hits the local
I'm not sure that's
cinema.
necessarily really true. I mean, I'm often surprised at how educated cinema goers are when I go to see something which I thought was super niche and something that I'd only be interested in. Then I turn up at the cinema and find that there's just like a 3/4 sold out thing. It's like, wait, for this movie? Like, yeah. I'm always surprised by this, and like I feel this film.
But doesn't that counter your argument that people don't know about it and won't wait to watch?
No, I'm talking about when movies come out. Like the thing is, I'm saying that I was interested in this quite a few months ago when there was buzz around it, but It just feels as though this can drop into cinemas and no one's going to know about it because the buzz has subsided. I feel like the day and age of people saying, "Hey, I'm just going to go and see a movie this weekend," doesn't really exist anymore. Instead, people are like, "Oh, I want to see this movie." Like, I think people are more purposeful with their movie viewing than they used to be.
I think when our internet is absolutely smothered with Captain Americas and, the big films that take up the global internet space, I think that's true. It's proven to be true. There's now day and date around the world, which used to be a really rare thing. It's not that anymore. But with these smaller films, that's not required.
Yeah, I don't know. I'm still not buying a ticket to it. So I don't know. That's one ticket I've lost.
I'm sure Pamela's just rocked by that news.
Maybe. And the other thing as well, the other reason why I've kind of lost interest in her is I just got really tired of the narrative around, Pamela Anderson was sort of done wrong. Like, I feel she was, like, there was lots of things that went her way as well. And like any actor who's given opportunities, like, there's always going to be vultures trying to, take from you. Okay. But at the same time, like, those that actually have longevity are those that just made smart decisions back in the day. And it just kind of felt like she never really did. Like, I appreciate she's having a second sort of bite at it, and I'm sure she's a perfectly pleasant person, but at the same time, I just got tired about that just being the only narrative that sort of surrounded her. It just kind of bothered me a bit.
Yeah. Okay. Bothered you are. The other thing I've been watching, and I put it on late for me, 10 o'clock one night after a busy day at work. Big mistake when I didn't realise that it was a 2.5 hour special, is the SNL at 50 years of Saturday Night Live. Now, I'm an enormous fan of the SNL team. This is a birthday party celebration in which pretty much everyone has been invited. And a lot of the famous characters from years gone by and all the big stars, well, not all the big stars, most of the big stars from past generations were dragged out to do their little bit. A couple of odd music choices, I've got to say, to sort of...
Miley Cyrus.
Well, that wasn't a bad thing. And the fact that it was a nod to Sinead O'Connor and the role that she's played in Saturday Night Live's history, I thought was a pretty cool thing. And it wasn't a bad rendition of the song either.
No, but is it though? Okay, so I watched this as well. I chose to watch it in a sensible time and not at like 10 o'clock at night.
I got to the end of it. I rattled through it. Yep.
But in a way, you're kind of watching it the way the spirit of the show is supposed to be intended, which is watching it bleary-eyed. Look, I found, first of all, the Miley Cyrus thing, it just seemed kind of offensive, okay, playing like the Sinead O'Connor song, because they did her dirty back in the day. And I'm not sure this was necessarily a tribute to her, considering that Miley Cyrus said some pretty shitty things about Sinead O'Connor during the, over the years as well. So, I don't know, it just kind of felt gross, I think, playing like that song specifically.
I think it was an acknowledgement maybe on both the show's part and maybe Miley's that's all behind them and what Sinead contributed to pop culture and music in general and Saturday Night Live in particular was significant.
But shouldn't they have mentioned her? Like, they just don't. Like, there was something gross about that.
She always let her music speak, though, in many regards.
Yeah.
The rest of the special was...
What's your point? Okay,
no, I'm not sure what your point is. But the rest of the special is that...
Well, I think it's pretty clear what my point was. I think it was just gross that they didn't reference her specifically as an artist, and considering the show very publicly did her dirty. Like, the next week they had Joe Pesci on the program who was shit-talking her.
Oh, that's water under... Yeah, but I think that's water under the bridge.
It's not water under the bridge, though. Like, it really... Like, she did do this as a sense of self-sabotage to her career. Okay, but the show should have stood up for her, and they just never did. And it's not like she ever made amends with Saturday Night Live, nor them to her. Like, they just kind of went their separate ways, and it's become part of the narrative now around the late Sinead O'Connor's life. I don't know, like, it just... If they were going to do an ode, a testament to Sinead O'Connor, this person they did do dirty, they should have at least mentioned her name. Okay, even if it's just like a maid or something. And they should have had Miley Cyrus doing the song.
Yeah, maybe you might be right. There was over the whole 2.5 hours, there was an awful lot that they did right. I think it was a show that certainly spoke to the highs and lows of what Saturday Night Live has been over the years. I remember a terrific joke from the 25th anniversary show when Chris Rock got up and said 25 years of Saturday Night Live, 4 of them funny, which I think was a pretty good summation of how people thought. And anyone who's seen...
I thought that was very nicely reflected by the 2.5 hour special as well.
Yes,
which,
yeah,
man, that was patchy.
Yeah, it was. It had some moments that were dragging out the Debbie Downer sketch in a sketch that didn't work towards the end of the show. There were some very funny moments.
I thought the Debbie Downer sketch was fine, but it wasn't the best Debbie Downer sketch that they've done.
No, not at all. Not at all. And in fact, it's ironic that the most memorable Debbie Downer sketch was one in which everyone broke and kind of went off the famous one with Lindsay Lohan, which is a must-watch if you've never seen it.
Yeah, it seemed very purposeful putting Jimmy Fallon into the Debbie Downer sketch.
Yeah, for sure.
Because he was notable for always breaking. But he didn't.
No, he didn't in this one either. There was some shoehorning of stars into there that didn't need to be shoehorned in, the Miles Tellers and the Ayo Edabiris, although they've both got history with the show and were popular in sketches.
Well, I thought the whole thing with the people that were appearing on the show, as well as like in the audience, were people who had either been cast members or had guest hosted. That was pretty much the predominant. There was a couple of other people that just kind of slipped in for one reason or another, but that was generally what was happening.
I'm glad that Sarah Sherman, who's my favourite of the current cast members, got a fairly big role to play in some of the sketches. I think she's very terrific and a star of the future. So having watched it all, I think it was exactly the sort of birthday special that needed to be, reflected the very Lorne Michaelness of the last sort of 50 years of this landmark show. So yeah, it was a lot of fun.
Yeah. Just a couple of things. The Steve Martin monologue at the very beginning, joined as well by Mulaney. I think that worked out remarkably well.
Very funny. Very funny.
The show very quickly lost a lot of steam by having a really terrible Will Ferrell sketch where he was performing as, I can't remember his name.
Who was, and with Kristen Wiig as the Denise character. Yeah, I thought the regurgitating of certain characters didn't work, and to a certain extent the one at the end as well with Kiernan and Eddie Murphy doing the Toogs Cons trying to scare the white guy straight, that was more energetic than funny, I guess you could say.
Yeah, that was rough going. The Black Jeopardy sketch was kind of funny at the beginning with Eddie Murphy doing his version of Tracy Morgan. Like, that was funny, but then the sketch just kept on going. And by the time Tom Hanks came out, man, there was just no life left in that thing at all.
Unwarranted, yeah, absolutely right.
If anyone's going to try to watch any sort of moment from it, I think the best moment was probably Bill Murray coming out as part of... Sorry, there was a Weekend Update that was broadly just terrible, but Bill Murray came out for part of it and did the top 10 Weekend Update hosts through the history of the program, and that was sparkling. Absolutely just incredible.
Yes, it was. The absolute highlight for me, in a very sentimental sort of way, was Adam Sandler's song, reflecting upon the cast members in his time there and those that are no longer with us and those that made such a contribution to what SNL is.
What was kind of interesting was that the more I started thinking about the cast members over the years that have passed on, it just kind of felt like the best cast members, like the most iconic ones, just are no longer with us. And like maybe that was just kind of heightened a little bit by Dan Aykroyd not being there. Like it just kind of felt like he was a bit absent from the program.
True.
But you know, when you start thinking about like, you know, your Farleys and Norm Macdonald particularly. Yeah, as you started going through like Phil Hartman, like it just kind of felt like the people that, you know, certainly resonated the most with me from Saturday Night Live just weren't there.
That's true. Yeah,
for obvious reasons. And it would have been weird if they were there.
And I think they've been, yes, obviously it would have been weird if they were there, but they were like that sort of passing when they're in their prime or when they show so much promise is always a way to capture their talent.
And that's the other thing as well. Like, if we're going to look at the show as being sort of really speaking to the Saturday Night Live legacy and spirit of the show now, you look through that audience and boy, everyone's just looking old. Like, it just kind of felt like because the show is so notable for being like this countercultural program when it first hit, and it was like the kids taking over TV.
Exactly.
And certainly it just kind of feels as though, sure, young people kind of brought into the fold, but they're not really on the same level as anyone from those early years.
When they brought Lil Wayne out to do his number and they had some of the coolest young pop stars singing their bits, I thought this is an absolute effort to counter exactly what you're saying there. I thought dragging out some of these old characters and these old stars, God bless them, wonderful in their day, but they don't give any relevance to the young audience today. Maybe that's the point of the show, is to highlight that it is more an institution now than the cutting-edge counterculture thing it was back in the day, and it's more like I don't know, what do we look at it now like? Yes. All right, let's wrap this up.
Maybe I just felt dirty because you had Paul Simon at the beginning being teamed up with, was it Sabrina Carpenter? And like Paul Simon, like certainly, look, I love Paul Simon. I think he's fantastic. And he's certainly a very notable figure in the history of Saturday Night Live history. I'm pretty sure he was the host of the second episode and really sort of brought a lot of the sketch comedy integration of the host, sort of doing a lot of that sort of gear right there from week 2. Really important that he's there. And he's certainly older. He doesn't quite have like the same sort of magic range that I guess he was bringing like even like 10 or 15 years ago when I know I saw him live and thought he was incredible. He certainly passed on, that's not the phrase I want to use. He passed by a little bit. Like it's great to see him there and I was really glad that he was there, but I just kind of wish he was there with someone who's more complimentary than Sabrina Carpenter was, who felt like she was doing an entirely different thing.
Yeah, I don't know if I agree with that entirely. I thought it was a good matchup of young and old.
I mean,
I thought it was a
I certainly
strange
appreciate she's young and he's old. But,
I thought it was a strange song for them to to try to harmonise together. I do agree with that, yeah. All right.
Like she was just harmonising in an entirely different way. It was just weird.
That's Screen Watching for this week. You can see us at Screen Watching Podcast on the Facebook, Threads and YouTube as well at Screen Watching. Drop us an email at screenwatchingpodcast@gmail.com. Dan Barrett.
Find me at alwaysbewatching.com. It is a newsletter. It arrives in your inboxes. It's free to receive and free to love.
Free love. And do try and listen to our other podcast endeavour. It's called Best Movie Year. We are working through 100 films from the year 1987 to establish that question which has vexed mankind for many a eon now. Is 1987 the best movie year? I told you I'm tired. Stuff's going to come out of my mouth.
People have been asking for at least 200 years whether or not 1987.
Since before cinema began. Is 1987 the best movie year ever? We have got a great bunch of films already in the can. If you haven't heard our first, 17, 18 episodes, something like that. God, it's flying by. Do go back and have a listen to them at Best Movie Year 1987. Yeah, a lot of good stuff on there.
Yeah, and look, I mean, some of the films we've talked about so far have some of the cinema's brightest, shining, most exciting names. I mean, you've got names like Shelley Long and Terry O'Quinn. Look, I mean, it's a cavalcade of stars.
A cavalcade. Yes, it really is a cavalcade. And you'll be able to see that where you can get all your favourite podcasts and on our YouTube channel. All right, Dan Barrett, let's wrap this up.
Okay, well, I think it's wrapped. Folks, we'll be back next week.